Hi, I'm Stas Margaronis with Rebuild the United States. And once again, I am joined by Nick Conaway. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Uh, so today, Nick and I decided that we would discuss the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk and what that means to the United States and some of the lessons that we need to take from that. And for starters, I want to say, and Nick and I have discussed this in advance, we both want to make clear that the assassination of Charlie Kirk is an absolutely reprehensible act. It is not the act of a functional democracy. We cannot have a functional democracy if we do not have a tolerance for competing views. There's an old saying, I am willing to die by the sword for your right to say it. I don't know where that came from, but it's a fundamental that we have in our democracy. And at the point that we can no longer tolerate listening to other people and listening to and adjusting and learning from that differences, we have a serious problem. And when people take the assassination, the murder of Charlie Kirk, and either rejoice in it or blame somebody or use it for political advantage to say, oh, well, I told you so, you guys are all wrong, that's not helping. And this is a time where we need to have people calm down, listen to each other, and realize that the level of political killings is getting worse. We had the incident earlier this year where we had the representative from Minnesota who was assassinated. Now it's Charlie Kirk. Paul Pelosi was attacked, Nancy Speaker Pelosi's husband. And there were two attempts on President Trump last year. So the lesson here is not to make a bad situation worse. The
Mhm.
lesson here is to learn that we all need to calm down. So having made that opening statement, and I make that because rebuilding the United States is about people. And if people can't talk to each other and tolerate each other and work together, there's no way that we're rebuilding our country. There's no way we're modernizing. There's no way we're going to accept new ideas. And there's no way we're going to move forward. So with that, I'm going to ask Nick to talk a little bit about what Charlie Kirk meant to him and what he thought was his positive message. Nick?
Okay, thank you, Stas, for that opening remark, and thank you. So I understand that Charlie Kirk, if you search the internet or have followed him, he has a lot of very inflammatory responses, quotes about different groups of people, and different beliefs, and I want to not focus on that. What I want to focus on what I believe he did good for the country. Him being the founder of Turning Point USA, which is a group that goes to colleges and gets youth involved in politics. I think that's extreme importance. I think there's a big disconnect, and there has been a big disconnect over the recent years between uh, the old generation and this new generation, younger generation of people who the older generation investigate politics, they do their research, they care, they follow, they pay attention, and the younger generation who just had a disconnect of not caring and not being informed, making irrational decisions based on a Twitter post or an Instagram post that they saw, and then therefore blowing it way out of proportion without doing fact checking or research. And what I think Turning Point USA was great for is it got people, young people in particular, people in college, people coming into adulthood, debating and talking about differences in opinions and politics and differences in their livelihoods, right? To where it allowed open dialogue where people could communicate differences in a neutral setting where there didn't have to be this radicalized side on either side. I think that I've watched a lot of Charlie Kirk's videos. I've followed him for the past few years. And do I agree with everything he said? No. But do I believe in the idea of a peaceful debate where whether your opinion is completely opposite of mine, I don't have to do anything to harm you. I can disagree with you. I can express my viewpoints and my ideas, and we don't have to agree with each other, but at the end of the day, we can shake each other's hands and be okay with each other and not cause harm. Um, another thing that I wanted to bring up was that I think uh politicians on both sides, I think celebrity figures on both the left and the right have been in the wrong with their words of discussions and how they have to realize that they are people that us normal folk in society look up to
Listen to.
and
Yeah.
listen to. And there's, as we discussed before, our little pre-meeting, there's a big issue with mental health in America today. And I think that people get ideas, they hear part of a quote without the whole context. They see something on Twitter, on Instagram, and they have this idea and they take this and it incites violence, whether that was the intention or not. I don't think that the people saying these things and posting these things, their intention is to incite violence. But with mental health, what people don't understand is that they are already deranged. They're already not stable. And once they're fed this idea of this is what this person wants me to do, they run with it and it becomes an issue. It becomes what happened in Minnesota. It becomes what happened to Nancy Pelosi's husband. It becomes what the attempts on Trump. It becomes what just transpired 2 days ago with Charlie Kirk. And it's a sad, scary time uh for me as a person who hasn't seen much political violence in my life except for the last few years,
Yeah.
right? Stas, you were around in a time where there was a big disconnect in US history and there were assassinations of, you know,
The
strong,
Kennedys. The Kennedys. Martin Luther King.
right? Who they had their viewpoints and they were very strong. And because another person opposed what they thought, they were assassinated for it. And that's not right in any way, shape, or form. I see a lot of things on social media today that make me absolutely disgusted, where people are celebrating this as a victory for America. And I see it as an absolute opposite. I see it as a catalyst for something that potentially could be catastrophic for the United States. It is separating everybody on either the far left or the far right, and there's very little in between. And I see that I hope I'm wrong. I really do, but I don't see it calming down anytime soon.
Okay, so Nick, let me ask you this. Um, President Trump blamed the radical left for Charlie Kirk's death. Is that an appropriate response?
No, absolutely not. I don't. It absolutely is not. Charlie Kirk. I know that he had very inflammatory statements about Israel and other people, other organizations, not just the left. So I don't think that's appropriate for him to be saying that. I think that also again goes back to the point that I was making of could potentially incite violence because of what he's saying, right? We've had enough. Charlie Kirk's death was enough. We don't need to have more. But him saying this is going to get the radical people on the right, the mental health, the deranged, the people who are already potential incidents, a reason to do something, which is terrifying.
I agree. So let's talk a little bit. You and I were talking about the how social media really can warp things. And by taking snippets, you don't see the bigger picture. And people who are unstable anyway, which a lot of these shooters are. I mean, they're not stable, normal people. I mean, the people that are going into our classrooms, just, I mean, we're not even talking about that. I mean, that's becoming a normal monthly event that some crazy goes into a school and kills children. I mean, how screwed up is that?
Yeah.
Uh, so talk to me about social media and what you're seeing that really is scary.
So on social media, I mean, it's right now it's hard to not see what's going on, right? Whether it be on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or X as they call it now. It you see so many people who are just voicing. For instance, I saw an individual who posted, this is a horrible thing. I feel really horrible for Charlie Kirk's families, his kids. And they were attacked. They were attacked verbally by people saying that how could you be okay with this individual? Why are you worried about his family, right? It's good that he's dead. And it's insane to me that this is something that occurs. Also on with social media is that we talked about it. Somebody posts something, whether it be a politician or a celebrity or anybody, a public figure per se, who has a lot of following, and they post something that, let's say they post a 2 paragraph statement about something that happened, and then let's say there's a line in there that says, we need to end this at all costs, or let's put a target on them to somebody with mental health, to somebody who is already unstable. They're not going to see the whole context of the 2 paragraphs. What they're going to see is that small 4 or 5 word sentence that says, and in their head, let's incite violence. Let's do
Okay.
something about this.
Okay. So I've given you these quotes, but let me just go over a couple of them that you and I discussed earlier. Um, the one of the newspapers put together a series of quotes, and you pointed out that some of them are taken out of context. But let's go ahead. If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. That's 23rd of January, 2024. One that you and I discussed. If you're an WNBA pot smoking black lesbian, do you get treated better than a United States Marine? And you pointed out that that had to do with Brittany Griner and the fact that there was a United States Marine in Russia. And why did we just focus on getting Brittany Griner out and not get the Marine out? And I agree with you on that, that we should have been looking at both. When I look at the wording, though, it's a little provocative to say I'm a pot smoking black lesbian and you're getting treated better. But let me go on here. You mentioned the word target, and we both agree that using the word target is an inflammatory act, whether on the left or on the right, targeting Trump, targeting Newsom, targeting anybody. The quote I have here is the Charlie Kirk show, happening all the time in urban America, prowling blacks going around for fun to go target white people. That's a fact. It's happening more and more. Do you agree with that?
I don't agree with it, but I think, again, I don't agree with it, but he also, because of our First Amendment, has the right to say what he thinks. That's my standpoint on it. I
Okay.
don't agree with what he said.
Okay. My problem with this is that it seems to me an invitation to violence. And when I'm hearing somebody saying something which I know is not true, and you just pointed that out as well, it's inflammatory for a somebody who's a little bit unhinged to say, "Oh my God, Charlie Kirk says that blacks are going around for fun to go and target white people. And there's no evidence that I am aware of that I mean, there are gangs in America of many different
Mhm.
colors. Uh, you could always argue that one gang or another was picking on somebody, but that's not what this quote says. I mean, this quote is the kind of thing that is an advocacy for racial violence. I feel. I feel that this almost borders on kind of a almost I don't want to it's very fascistic. It reminds me of the 1930s. But let me go on here. If I'm dealing with somebody in customer service who's a moronic black woman, but why would you say that? I wonder, is she there because of her excellence, or is she there because of affirmative action? Now, you can argue about affirmative action being fair and unfair. And you and I talked about that one before. There's an issue there. Are we at a stage where we ought to be allowing everybody to go forward without having to have, affirmative action on some of these issues?
Mhm.
And you can make an argument about that. But if I was making the argument, it would not be my argument to say, you're really an idiot and you shouldn't be there. I would say, well, I don't believe you should be there, but I wouldn't be saying it in a pejorative type of way. Now, in one of these, okay, so the one that I found to be, I found this to be very, very provocative as well. Reject feminism, submit to your husband, Taylor, you're not in charge. And this was discussing the news of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's engagement. Uh, Let me say something about that. First of all, Taylor Swift has been a target because she has spoken out and she's an entertainer and she's obviously uh, not been supportive of President Trump and his policies. Uh, I know at a different age, and I can remember back when I was a young man that uh, the there were incidents where of domestic violence, and a woman would go to her priest, and she would say, "Well, Father, I was beaten up by my husband, or my husband harassed me," and the priests were not sympathetic, or they would say, and there was a time and I don't want to be too pejorative of my Greek Orthodox origins, that the priest would say, well, what it was that you did that you provoked your husband. Now, we both agree that that should have been something that goes in the past. But a quote like this seems to bring out something that should have been gone. And targeting Taylor Swift, to me, I mean, when you say submit to your husband, Taylor, I mean, it almost has a sexual connotation. Now, those are things that I find really, really scary and offensive. And they obviously created a situation here. I want to see the other side on this. So I mean, if you were having with your that is my daughter Benita, would you be telling her that she has to submit to her husband, that she has to obey and do whatever you tell her?
No, I wouldn't, but those aren't my beliefs. Right? Those are not my beliefs. I don't agree with that statement that he made. Whether I be a fan of Taylor Swift and her, her political beliefs and what she has stated, right? Because she has
Right.
said some inflammatory things about Trump and some things that to people can be taken as not politically correct or responsible either.
Sure.
No, I would not say that to my partner. That's I that's not my beliefs. Um, but again, I think I haven't watched the videos of those quotes that you've read me personally, but I know that a lot of his debates get very heated. And again, it kind of goes for me, it goes back to the things of what we were talking about, where you take two sentences out of a statement, and yes, they can be considered inflammatory in that statement, right? But then you look at the big picture and the whole debate, and it may be a little different, right? Do we know what the other party was saying? Do we know what the whole context of it was? Do I agree with the quotes as you sent me and as we've discussed? Absolutely not. I will be on the record for that. But do I, again, this I think this goes to a bigger issue for me. This goes to a bigger issue of a man who had two children and a wife who were in attendance of this event, witnessed their husband and their father die
Yeah,
because somebody didn't agree with what they had to say.
I'm in, and you and I are in total agreement that that was an abhorrent act. Um, Nick, I want to come back to something that you and I had talked about in an earlier discussion, and that is the challenges. And Charlie Kirk was talking about some of these issues, and you discussed that. We have a situation where younger Americans are disenfranchised. And we talked about the fact that wages adjusted for inflation have gone the wrong way over the last 50 years. I talked about the fact that when I went to work as a warehouse worker back in the 1970s, I was making a lot more money than if you were going into the workforce today that you could make, and that I could afford to buy a house, whereas you and I've talked about how much tougher that is. So we're in this environment where, in terms of income, in terms of housing, in terms of the real gap between rich and poor, your generation is really being shortchanged. And for me, that is the subtext of the Charlie Kirk message, that he is reaching out to people who really do have some legitimate grief and grievances. The American dream for generations and generations came true. And immigrants came from different parts of the world, came to the United States, and if they worked hard, they moved up the ladder. The Irish, the Italians, the Greeks, the Serbs, the Germans, the Russians, the Hispanics today, all of these different people, they have done better in our country up until now. And up until now, and you and I talked about this, the housing situation is a terrible problem. And it's a problem that's been made worse by the fact that we've really allowed our economics to become really elitist. And when I talk about rebuilding the United States, like that picture we've got of an offshore wind assembly area, which right now cannot be built because it's prohibited by the Trump administration, what I say is we should be having as many opportunities as possible for new jobs and new economic development and training and education. And you and I talked about this, that it's getting harder for younger people to do that. And young men have been on the receiving end because a lot of the jobs that they would traditionally go into, we've lost those because they got outsourced. And you and I talked about that this outsourcing really began in the 1980s when interest rates went up to fight inflation. And at that time, I remember hearing from a lot of people that we shouldn't be compensating overpaid American workers. If they can't compete, we should have foreigners come in and take their jobs. And that was the free trade message, and it was a bipartisan message. Republicans and Democrats were talking that way. And I was saying, what about rebuilding the United States? What about making it in the United States? And we have not been going there. So that subtext, you and your generation have a legitimate beef here. And I'm wondering, in terms, if we were trying to get a positive result out of the political situation that we're seeing, which we both agree is getting increasingly polarized, would a new deal on new jobs and new economic development, more investments in things that create good paying jobs, are those things that we ought to be looking at and as a strategy for our younger generation?
Yeah, I think that we do. I think we do. I think obviously something needs to change. I mean, the direction that America has gone with the workforce, the housing, you know, job, it, wages, everything just seems to be going in a wrong direction. And then I think beyond just that, what this has brought up and what this event that happened 2 days ago now highlighted was there is a huge divide among people. And we all need to come together and get out of our own way and realize that if we continue down this path, nothing's going to be achieved, right? There's no good that's going to come from hate on either end, right? We need to come together and put our own BS aside and go to move forward with rebuilding the United States. Because where the direction we're going, I'm sure I can look back in history and see, and there will be similar scenarios that have transpired, because the one thing about history is if you don't learn from it, it will repeat itself. And
Amen.
I feel like
Amen.
I'm sure that we're going to do some research now and look back in history and see what kind of things have transpired when there is not only political assassinations, but there's a huge disconnect between sides and between people, right?
And Nick, I think that this is actually a good way to conclude on this one. I would say that the obvious precedent for what you're talking about is the Civil War of 1861 to 65, and the assertion made by the first Republican president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And both Nick and I want to be really clear that the attack against and the killing of Charlie Kirk was a reprehensible act. It was wrong. It is an indication of a wrong place that we are going. And as Nick said, if we don't change directions, a bad situation is going to get worse. And that is no way to rebuild the United States. So for Nick Conaway and myself, thank you. Bear our message, and let's hope for the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.